Hi folks, welcome to this presentation on using the data that we calculated for the statement of financial position or the balance sheet and the statement of cash flow in order to help us calculate ratios for this problem. So let's begin. What you'll notice here is that on the left hand side I've got the GIA balance sheet or statement of financial position that we had worked with in a previous video, and we have come up with that balance sheet at the end of 2011. The question asks us to calculate free cash flow, the current cash debt coverage ratio, as well as the cash debt coverage ratio. So if we look at free cash flow, you remember basically what that is how much of our cash flow from our ongoing operating activities do we have, so that if we needed to take advantage of investing opportunities that might come up in the future that we may not know about now, do we have enough money to capitalize on them without necessarily having to borrow? So if we started with our net cash flow from operating activities, which we did calculate here, you'll remember is $20,200. All right. We look at the purchase of land. So when we look at deduct all of our capital expenditures and our dividends, again, we would have a free cash flow of negative $7,000. So we would not be in a position as GIA in order to capitalize on any of these opportunities should they come along in the future. So their free cash flow situation doesn't look very good. If we looked at some of the other solvency ratios, which is the current cash debt coverage ratio, you remember that the formula for that is your net cash flow from operating activities, which we already know is $20,200, divided by your average current liabilities. Well, our average current liabilities would be our current liabilities at the end of 2010 plus the current liabilities at the end of 2011 divided by 2. That's how you get an average for the period. So you remember that the question told us that at the end of 2010 we had current liabilities of $30,000, right? And we also know that the question told us that at the end of 2011 the accounts payable remained the same as at $30,000. So we already know that $30,000 at the beginning of 2011, $30,000 at the end of 2011 divided by 2 is just going to give you $30,000. So you'll see here that your current cash debt coverage ratio is under 1. That means that the company is not generating sufficient cash flow from its operating activities in order to cover its ongoing liabilities to its suppliers and trade. So that's a problem. All right. Now, in our next ratio, we have a cash debt coverage ratio, which again is your net cash flow from operating activities, but this time divided by your average total liabilities. It doesn't say current in it as this one did. It says just your cash debt coverage ratio. So now we have to go back to the statements and we have to calculate our ending balance of all liabilities at the end of 2010 and the ending balance of all liabilities at the end of 2011. Well, we'll focus on 2011 first because we have it here. We have $30,000 in accounts payable, $24,000 in our long-term notes, and $30,000 in our bonds, and we know that to be a total of $84,000, right? 30, 24, and 30 is $84,000. We have our ending balance at the end of 2010, which is $71,000. So if we go back to the data, the original data in the question, all we're doing is adding 30 and 41, which was in the original question at the end of 2010. So now we know that we've got $71,000 at the end of 2010. So on average, that's $77,500, which gives you an even worse amount. So you don't have enough cash flow coming in order to cover all of your debts, not just your long-term, but all of your debts. All right, current and non-current debts. All right. But, you know, we never look at these in isolation. What it tells us is that their solvency position is not strong, right? But what does our liquidity tell us? Now, we weren't asked in this question to really calculate liquidity, but if we did that, we would see that they have a strong current asset to current liability ratio, right? Their current assets in total are $99,000 if we take the cash, the AR, and the fair value through net income investments. If we add these up, we've got $99,000, and we've got $30,000 in current liabilities. So you can't always tell whether a company's financial position is strong or weak unless you look at all of the ratios together. If you just calculated liquidity, you'd think, wow, they're great. 3.3, that's well greater than 1. But again, we know we have to look at two things. We also have to look at the company's ability to pay off those liabilities, which we can see here. Their solvency is weak, right? But we also have to look at the industry. What's characteristic of the industry? We don't know what industry G is in, so we can't comment on that. But we can't make a decision based on any one set of ratios. But the key here is that if I wanted to bolster and make sure that I did have enough cash flow coming in to pay my debts, because guess what? If I don't, my suppliers might cut me off. If I had an income tax liability that I had to pay, I wouldn't be generating enough cash flow to pay that. That's not even in here yet. But if we had one, if we had a tax liability and we're not generating enough cash flow, what would we do? So I think companies have to look at, where is your money tied up? Well, if you look at your accounts receivable, you can see how much they've increased. They're 41.6 at the end of 2011. At the end of 2010, they were 21.2. So they've actually gone up 20,400. Right? So one of the things you might ask yourself is, gee, how would I collect that extra amount in receivables? So what I would say is, even though your liquidity position is strong, your solvency position is not. So GIA should be finding a way to collect these receivables quicker so that it would be increasing their net cash provided from operating activities, right? And that way they would have likely sufficient cash to pay off these liabilities, current and non-current, as they come due. So again, that's just a little bit of information on the ratios. So I hope you found this little video on the ratios and the whole series on the GIA problem helpful to you. And at this point, we're done our study of GIA Inc.